Maya has a spreadsheet. She built it herself, color-coded, every expense categorized, a column for what she planned to spend and a column for what she actually spent. She updates it most months. She's read the books. She knows what a budget is. She knows what compound interest is. She knows she should have an emergency fund. And at 11:43 on a Wednesday night, she is sitting at her kitchen table with a cold cup of tea, her laptop open and her bank app closed, because she opened it for half a second, saw enough, and decided she didn't need to see the rest tonight. She is not lazy, she is not reckless, she is not in any meaningful sense bad with money. But she has believed that she is for so long that it has become part of how she describes herself. I'm just not good with money. She says it like it's a personality trait, like she was born with a missing gene that other people have, the responsible ones, the ones whose bank apps don't feel like a threat. Here's the thing though. That feeling, the one that makes a bank app feel like a threat, that is not a character flaw, that is a conditioned response. And the people who conditioned it mostly aren't who you think they are. By the time this is over, you're going to understand exactly how that happened. Not in a general, vague, society is bad kind of way. In a specific, documented, this was by design kind of way. And once you understand the design, the shame starts to make a different kind of sense. We'll get to who actually benefits from you believing you're bad with money. That part is going to make you uncomfortable, but we need to start somewhere else first. We need to start with a number. The number is 8, hold on to that. There is a field of research called financial psychology, and for about 30 years it has been studying something very specific, where money behavior actually comes from. Not what people decide to do with money, where the impulse comes from before the decision even forms. And what the research keeps finding across cultures, across income levels, across educational backgrounds, is that the beliefs driving most adult financial behavior were formed before the age of 8. That's the number 8. Not 18, not during your first job or your first credit card or your first real financial mistake. 8. Before you fully understood what money was, before you could have possibly made an informed decision about it, your brain was already building a model of what money means, what it does, who deserves it, and what happens when you don't have enough of it. Dr. Brad Klontz, one of the leading researchers in this space, calls them money scripts. And the reason they matter isn't because they're interesting, it's because they operate like background software. They run underneath conscious decision-making. You think you're choosing to avoid your bank account. Your money script chose it years ago, you're just executing the command. And this is where it shifts, because most people hear your money beliefs were formed in childhood and they immediately think, therapy topic, not my problem, I'm a rational adult who makes rational decisions. But I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, I didn't have a traumatic childhood, my family wasn't in crisis, why do I still feel like this? And that's exactly the right question, because the research isn't just about financial trauma, it's about financial environment, two completely different things. You don't need to have grown up in poverty to have inherited a money script that limits you. You need to have grown up around money being talked about in a specific way or not talked about at all. You need to have absorbed through watching, through overhearing, through the particular silence that falls when a bill arrives, what money means to the people who raised you. Silence is a money script. We don't talk about finances is a money script. Money doesn't grow on trees is a money script. Rich people are greedy is a money script. We're not the kind of family that has savings. That one hits different, doesn't it? Every one of these is a financial belief being encoded into a developing brain as fact, not as opinion, not as one possible way to see things, as fact, because that's how children process the world. They absorb the environment as reality, not as a perspective. And by the time you are old enough to form your own perspective, those scripts are already running. They feel like intuition. They feel like your own thoughts. You don't see the code because you are inside it. Here is where this gets specific. The people who feel most acutely, most persistently bad with money, the ones who have the most shame, the most avoidance, the most late-night closed bank apps, are statistically most likely to have grown up in households that were financially stressed. Not because financial stress is hereditary, because financial stress creates a specific kind of money script, one built around scarcity, around shame, around money as a source of threat rather than a tool. When you grow up in an environment where money is tight, you don't learn that money is a resource to be managed. You learn that money is a source of danger. You learn that checking accounts carefully means seeing something that might devastate the weak. You learn that spending anything feels like a countdown. You learn that stability is a temporary state and that the other shoe is always about to drop. Those aren't irrational beliefs. In the environment they were formed in, they were accurate, they were adaptive. Your brain built a model that kept you emotionally prepared for the next financial crisis. That was smart, that was protective. The problem is that you carried that model into an adult life where the environment changed and the script didn't. So now you make decent money, more than your parents did maybe, but you still spend like the other shoe is about to drop. You still avoid your bank account because seeing it might ruin the week. You still feel shame about money conversations because in your model, money conversations always meant something was wrong. That is not being bad with money. That is a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do in the wrong context. And this is the point in the video where most finance content would tell you, here are 5 steps to fix your money mindset. Reframe your beliefs, journal about your relationship with money. We're not doing that because that advice, while not entirely wrong, skips something important. It assumes that if you just change your mind hard enough, the script rewrites itself. But here's what the neuroscience actually shows. Habitual financial behavior is processed in the basal ganglia, the part of the brain that handles automatic responses, the same part that processes muscle memory, and the basal ganglia does not respond to journaling. It responds to repeated new experience, which means awareness is necessary, but it is not sufficient. And the gap between I understand why I do this and I've actually stopped doing it is not a motivation gap, it's a neurological one. Knowing this doesn't solve the problem. But it does change the problem. Because if you've been treating this as a character issue, if you've been calling yourself bad with money and carrying that like something you deserved, you've been trying to solve the wrong equation. You're not bad with money. You are running software that was installed without your consent, in conditions you didn't choose, by an environment that was itself responding to pressures much larger than any individual. That's a different problem, it has different solutions, and it requires a completely different starting point, which is not shame. Let's bring Maya back. Because here's the thing about Maya's spreadsheet, it exists. That matters. The reason Maya still struggles isn't that she doesn't know what to do, she knows exactly what to do. The gap, the persistent, exhausting Tuesday night gap, is between knowing and feeling. And the reason that gap exists is not laziness. It's that every time she approaches her finances, her nervous system registers it as a threat. Not because her finances are a threat, but because that's the association that got encoded when she was 7 years old, watching her mother go quiet at the kitchen table. The spreadsheet was Maya's attempt to solve a knowledge problem, but she doesn't have a knowledge problem. She has an unprocessed inherited response that was never hers to begin with. And the system that sold her the budgeting books, the one that keeps selling her the budgeting apps and the money courses and the financial glow-up content, that system benefits from her believing the gap is a knowledge gap, because a knowledge gap is monetizable. A nervous system response that needs lived experience and time and sometimes professional support that is harder to package and sell. The financial wellness industry in the US alone is worth over $11 billion. It grows fastest when people feel most ashamed of their financial behavior. The shame is not a side effect. In some ways, and this is uncomfortable to say directly, the shame is part of the product. Not because anyone sat in a room and decided to weaponize your self-image, but because shame makes people buy solutions. And shame grows best in the absence of the actual explanation, which is what we're doing here instead. There is a version of you that was never told any of this. That version opened their first credit card at 19, made some mistakes, felt terrible about it, called themselves bad with money, and spent the next decade buying books they didn't finish and making spreadsheets they eventually closed. And every time they fell short of the goal, the savings target, the debt payoff, the 6-month emergency fund, they filed it as more evidence of the original verdict. Bad with money, just not built for this. And the verdict was never true, but it was repeated often enough internally by themselves that it calcified into identity. Here's what financial psychology has found about identity and behavior. When a person identifies with a failure state, I am bad with money, rather than I am struggling with money, the identity itself becomes a barrier to change. Because change requires believing the current state is not permanent, and identity says it is. You cannot budget your way out of a belief that budgeting was never going to work for someone like you. The first intervention isn't a financial one, it's a narrative one. It's the moment where you look at the evidence of your own life and say, not as affirmation, not as self-help script, but as honest reckoning, this wasn't my fault to begin with, and it does not have to stay. Now I want to be direct about something. This is not an excuse to do nothing. Understanding the origin of a behavior doesn't remove the responsibility to change it. And there are real, practical, structured things that move the needle, not because motivation suddenly kicks in, but because the right systems reduce the number of moments where your nervous system gets to vote. Automation is one of them, not because it's a hack, but because it removes the decision from the threat-response loop entirely. Money moves before your brain has to process it as a transaction. The basal ganglia doesn't have to vote. Friction reduction is another, making the bank app feel less like opening a verdict and more like checking a weather forecast. Small, repeated, low-stakes exposure, not a dramatic confrontation with your finances, just familiarity. The same way you stop noticing a background noise once it becomes routine. And this is the one most people skip: community, not a group of people who are succeeding and making you feel behind. A group of people who are honest about the process, because shame cannot survive witness, it requires isolation. The moment other people in the room are nomming the same experience you thought was only yours, the script starts to lose its authority. These aren't 5 steps, they're entry points, and they work differently for different people depending on the specific money script running underneath. But the direction is the same, not harder, different, and always starting from a place that does not require you to be ashamed of where you are. Maya's still at the kitchen table. She hasn't opened the bank app yet tonight, she might not. And that is okay, not as a permanent state, but as a place to stand right now while she understands something she wasn't told before. The cold tea, the unanswered text from her mom, the spreadsheet that is genuinely, legitimately impressive given everything running underneath it, none of that is evidence of failure. It is evidence of someone navigating a financial reality using tools she assembled herself without a map from a starting point that was never explained to her. That is not bad with money. That is someone who was never shown what money actually is, not as a number, but as a system of meaning that got written into her long before she had any say in it. And once you understand that, once you stop treating the shame as data about who you are and start treating it as data about what you were handed, the equation changes. Not overnight, not easily, but in a direction you couldn't move in when you were standing on the wrong ground. And that is where it starts, not with a budget, not with a savings target, with understanding what was actually built inside you and deciding for the first time deliberately what gets to stay. If you've been making financial decisions from a place of shame, and most people watching this have, even if they don't call it that, then you already know there's more to this than the spreadsheet. Every week on this channel we go into another one of those layers, not motivation, not generic tips, the actual psychology, the actual data, the actual picture of how this works and why it keeps not working the way you were told it would. The next one goes somewhere most finance content won't touch. If you're not subscribed, you'll miss it. That's not pressure, that's just what happens when you don't. And once you see it like today, you can't really go back to the version of yourself that didn't.